You notice it on the third day, not the first. The first day you chalk it up to confusion. The second day you tell yourself they just need time. But on the third day, when your dog walks to the spot where the other one used to sleep, sniffs it once, slowly, and then just stands there staring at nothing, something shifts inside you because you realize they're looking for them, and they don't understand why they can't find them. Most people who share their home with more than one pet have lived some version of this moment, and most of them describe the same quiet devastation of watching it happen. We know our own grief. We've had language for it our whole lives. But watching a dog grieve dog, another animal who was simply there every day for years, is something most of us are completely unprepared for. We tell ourselves they'll get over it, that they didn't really understand the bond the way we did, that it was companionship, not love, that animals don't experience loss the same way. And this is where most people get it wrong, because what science has found about the way dogs process the death of a bonded companion isn't just emotionally complex, it's neurologically verifiable, physiologically measurable, and in ways that researchers only began to quantify in the last decade. It mirrors the grief architecture of a species far closer to our own than most people are ready to accept. Start with the behavior, because that's where everyone starts. When one dog in a multi-pet household dies, the surviving dog frequently shows a cluster of changes that appear quickly and often simultaneously. Reduced appetite, increased vocalization, particularly at night, prolonged sleep in unusual locations, often the deceased dog's spots, a pattern of returning repeatedly to the last places that animal occupied, reduced interest in play, lowered engagement with the owner, sometimes a new and almost anxious quality to how they follow people around the house. Most owners interpret this loosely as sadness, and most people around them say the same thing. Give it a few weeks, they'll adjust. They probably just miss the company, but that's only part of the story. And the part they're missing is what makes this so much more significant than anyone gives it credit for. In 2016, the Blue Cross Animal Welfare Organization conducted one of the most extensive surveys ever done on animal bereavement, interviewing owners of dogs who had lost a companion animal in the home. The results were striking. More than 80% of dogs showed at least 4 behavioral changes following the death. Nearly 2/3 became more attached to their human owners. More than half ate less. Around a third became less active. And 1 in 4 was reported to have vocalized more than usual, whining, howling, or crying in ways their owners had rarely or never heard before. These weren't passing adjustments. The average duration of noticeable behavioral change across the survey was between 2 and 6 months. That isn't a minor disruption. That is grief with a timeline. But here's where it gets interesting, because the question researchers wanted to answer wasn't just whether dogs grieve, it was what they are actually grieving. Whether the loss they experience is simply the absence of a familiar presence, like losing access to a toy or a routine, or whether something deeper, something more fundamentally relational, was being lost. To understand that, you have to understand what these dogs actually shared. Dogs living together in the same household over months and years don't just coexist. Their biology synchronizes. This is not a metaphor. A 2019 study by Lena Roth's research team at Linköping University in Sweden, which examined long-term cortisol patterns in cohabiting animals, found measurable hormonal synchrony between bonded individuals who share a living space. Stress response systems begin to mirror each other. The rhythm of calm and arousal in one body starts to reflect the rhythm in another, not through deliberate communication, through proximity, through thousands of hours of shared physical space, shared sleep patterns, shared sensory environment. What this means is that 2 dogs who have lived together for years are not just emotionally bonded, they are biologically calibrated to each other. Their nervous systems have been co-regulating, quietly, every single day. And when one of them disappears, the surviving dog's nervous system doesn't just register an absence. It loses a regulatory anchor it didn't even know it was depending on. What's happening is much deeper than missing a friend. The olfactory dimension adds another layer that most people don't consider. Dogs experience the world primarily through scent in a way that is almost impossible for humans to fully imagine. With 300 million olfactory receptors compared to our 6 million, a dog's nose doesn't just detect presence. It constructs an entire chemical portrait of the animals and people around them, a detailed, constantly updated map of who is nearby, how they're feeling, and what their body is doing at a biological level. For years, the companion animal's scent was everywhere, in the bedding, on the furniture, at the food bowl, in the yard. It was a permanent feature of the environment, a signal the surviving dog's nervous system had categorized as constant, familiar, safe. And then one day, it starts to fade. Researchers who study canine olfactory memory note that scent decay, the gradual disappearance of a familiar chemical signature from a shared environment, can itself function as a kind of extended loss event for a dog. The grief doesn't arrive in a single moment the way it might for us. It arrives in increments, as each trace of the companion's scent disappears from another surface, another corner, another object in the home. The dog keeps searching because the information they have, the scent that says this animal exists here, hasn't fully disappeared yet. They aren't confused. confused, they are following evidence, and the science gets stranger because researchers who studied social bonding in canine groups found something in the structure of these relationships that changes how we should think about what's being lost. Dogs form what behavioral scientists call differentiated social bonds, meaning they don't experience all companions equally. In a multi-dog household, a surviving dog may have had a relationship with the deceased that served specific functional roles: play regulation, sleep proximity, physical contact, shared alerting behavior. Each of those roles represented a form of social input that the surviving dog's nervous system was structured around. When the companion dies, it isn't one relationship that ends. It's a set of daily micro-interactions that disappear simultaneously. The particular way one dog would initiate play, the way they slept pressed against each other, the shared response to sounds outside. A 2020 study published in Scientific Reports surveyed owners of dogs who had lost a bonded companion and found that the most significant behavioral changes were reported not simply in dogs who had spent the most time together, but specifically in dogs who had engaged in the most physical contact. Dogs who slept touching, who groomed each other, who regularly lay in physical proximity showed the deepest disruption following loss. The grief was not proportional to time, it was proportional to touch. This connects directly to what neuroscience tells us about physical contact and the mammalian stress response. Oxytocin, the neurochemical most associated with bonding and social safety, is released through physical contact, regularly, every time two bonded animals sleep together or rest in proximity. Over years of shared life, this creates what researchers describe as a biological expectation of contact, a nervous system state that has been repeatedly confirmed and reinforced through daily touch. When that contact ends permanently, the oxytocin loop breaks. The nervous system registers not just an emotional loss, but a physiological one. A source of biological calm that was scheduled into the body's daily experience simply stops arriving. That isn't sentiment, that's neurobiology. The evolutionary context matters here too. Dogs did not evolve as solitary animals. Their wolf ancestors lived in coherent social units where the bonds between individuals served direct survival functions. The loss of a packmate wasn't merely emotional. It was a structural disruption that required behavioral adaptation. The mourning patterns we observe in domestic dogs today, the searching, the vocalization, the attachment to the deceased's objects and spaces, are almost certainly inherited from the adaptive responses wild canids developed to process the loss of a group member. This means that when your dog walks to that empty bed and stands there, they aren't simply confused. They are running a deeply ancient behavioral program designed to register, process, and eventually adapt to the absence of a known companion. It looks like grief because, at every level we can measure, it is. But here's the part you need to understand clearly. Because this is where the owner's response matters enormously. There is a meaningful difference between a dog moving through a natural grief adjustment and a dog whose system has become stuck in a state of chronic stress. Normal grief in a surviving dog looks like behavioral changes that gradually reduce in intensity over weeks. Reduced appetite that stabilizes, increased vocalization that slowly decreases, searching behavior that becomes less frequent as scent fades from the environment. These are uncomfortable to witness, but they are the nervous system doing its job. What requires attention looks different. A dog that stops eating entirely for more than 2 days. A dog that completely stops engaging with any stimulus, owner, food, play, outdoor environment. A dog showing physical symptoms alongside behavioral ones. Significant weight loss, disrupted elimination, visible lethargy that doesn't respond to any intervention. A dog whose distress is not diminishing at all after several weeks. These are signs that the grief has crossed from processing into crisis, and a dog in that state needs veterinary support, not just patience. The most important thing an owner can do in the weeks following a companion animal's death is maintain routine more carefully than they ever have before. Not to distract the dog, not to force cheerfulness into the environment, but because routine, the walk at the same time, the meals at the same schedule, the evening presence of the owner in the same room, provides the nervous system with a substitute anchor, while the biological calibration to the deceased companion slowly unwinds. You cannot replace what they lost, but you can be the stable signal their nervous system reaches for while it reorganizes. And this is where the research delivers something genuinely unexpected. Studies on canine grief recovery consistently find that the single strongest predictor of behavioral recovery isn't time, and it isn't the introduction of a new companion. It's the quality of the surviving dog's relationship with their primary human. Dogs who had highly integrated, physically close relationships with their owners, who slept nearby, who received frequent direct physical contact, who had owners who maintained consistent daily routines, showed faster and more complete behavioral recovery than dogs whose owner relationships were more distant or less consistent. The bond with you is not separate from their grief, it is the mechanism through which they heal from it. So here is what all of this means when you hold it together. When your dog stands at that empty bed, or searches the house for a scent that is slowly disappearing, or whines at night for a companion that will not come, they are not confused. They are not simply uncomfortable with a change in routine. They are moving through the genuine neurological and physiological loss of a being their entire body was calibrated to, a companion encoded in their stress hormones, their oxytocin rhythms, their olfactory memory, and the ancient behavioral architecture they inherited from animals who understood, long before language existed, what it meant to lose one of their own. And you, in those weeks, are not a distraction from that loss. You are the reason they survive it. Your presence, your routine, your physical closeness. These are not small things. They are the biological replacement for the anchor that disappeared. The nervous system doesn't grieve alone when it has something stable to reach toward. Watch your dog through this. Don't rush them. Don't minimize what you're seeing. What you're witnessing is one of the most honest things that happens between animals. The unguarded, unapologetic experience of missing someone they loved. They can't tell you what they feel, but the science just did. If this video helped you understand what your dog is going through, leave a comment below. I read all of them, and if you want to go deeper, what actually happens inside a dog's brain in their final days, and what one neuroscience finding says about the very last thing they feel, that video is next. I'll see you there. If this explains something you've been watching happen at home, leave a comment. I read everyone, and if you want to understand what your dog experiences in their own final days and what science says your presence does to their brain in those last moments, that video is next.